Hi guys, welcome back and hello if you are new. So this is my first review for 2025 and it is an absolutely massive record. It's a huge deal amongst the Dream Theatre community and I think something that many people thought may not even see the light of day ever happen again, essentially. So without further ado, my first album review of 2025 is Dream Theatre's Parasomnia. For those of you who may not be familiar with Dream Theatre, you know, they are one of the biggest progressive metal bands ever, I would say. This is their 16th studio album, but most importantly, it is the first record to feature Mike Portnoy. So for a little bit of context, Mike Portnoy left the band in 2009, I think it was, after their Black Clouds and Silver Linings record, one of my favourite albums by Dream Theatre. And went off and did all sorts of stuff, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, Dream Theatre kept things going. They had a dramatic turn of events. They had the self-titled record, Distance Over Time, View from the Top of the World, and I think that's it. Now, Portnoy has returned. So this is literally like, if you're a Dream Theatre fan, probably the biggest moment ever. And the reason it's such a big moment is because Portnoy was a founding member of the band. He has been really integral in their sort of musical ideas. I think conceptually, he's always been quite a, quite integral cog. So Parasomnia is a concept relating to disruptive sleep-related disturbances. So I'll just kind of break each track down very quickly for you guys. So In the Arms of Morpheus is a track which is kind of like an overture, which is, kind of commonplace for Dream Theatre to do. But Morpheus was the Greek god of dreams. Then we have Night Terror, which is about when you kind of wake up and you're partially asleep, but also partially awake. And then A Broken Man is about sleep disturbance caused by PTSD. After that, we've got Dead Asleep, which is based on a real story where a guy killed his wife because he thought that, I think they were like someone attacking or something like that, woke up, realized that he, murdered his loved one. After that, we've got Midnight Messiah, which is basically about people who go into dreams and feel like they kind of live their life through the dream and kind of come alive more so when they're asleep than they are when they're awake. Are We Dreaming is just kind of like a cool interlude and, kind of just has these different voices and different ideas, I think, of what you could expect to hear, kind of between that sort of sleeping. Bend the Clock is about if you could go back and reverse all of these sleep, ailments, would you? And would it change the person who you are? And then the Shadow Man incident is a confrontation with an apparition where we're not sure if it's real or kind of, a figment of our imagination, but basically represents, what are they called? Sleep paralysis, essentially. So it's like a sleep paralysis demon manifesting. Each track is a statement of its own, but also works really well as being part of a whole. And I think that works especially well with each track being a disorder, because you can be like, okay, well, that's the one about PTSD. That's the one about night terrors. That's the one about sleep paralysis, that kind of thing. So this idea of parasomnia is reflected through the album's lyrics and, the music, but also I think in the sort of sound effects and the overall atmosphere of the record, which adds to that sense of the cinematic and the theatric. In the Arms of Morpheus, is a great example of that. It starts off with this sort of what sounds like a New York high street or something, then the window sort of closes and that sound gets deadened, and then you hear like the flicking of switches and things like that, and you're like, oh, okay, right, this person's kind of going to sleep. And then they breathe that sort of final as we hear, the music of the overture kind of start. But then it has this sort of like weird droplet sort of sound with the echo, and then you hear this massive 8-string which just kind of comes out of the darkness, just like, but also works as well as like this sort of weird, it's almost like an alarm clock from hell, I guess, but it's really jarring, and then it kind of moves you into that overture. But there's also, chanting, choirs, things like that in Midnight Messiah. There's kind of like an Italian sort of feel to Dead Asleep, which is a really great melody that they've created. And then the record ends with the Shadow Man incident, which immediately sets the scene. You know, there's like crickets. Again, you can hear the creak of floorboards. And it kind of just has a little bit more of a creepy, slightly Agatha Christie kind of vibe to it, which I really, really liked. The ending of the record and the beginning of the record are very cyclical, you know, so I think the final sort of notes that we hear right at the end, when all of the music is finished, is actually the similar kind of melody that we hear right at the beginning of the record, which is very Dream Theater, it's very meta, and kind of represents that idea of eternal sleep. You know, kind of, even though you wake up and you escape these nightmares, they still kind of come back to haunt you whenever you go to sleep. So when it comes to the actual songs on the record, you know, I think the overall return of this heavier Dream Theater is very much still here. But for me, this record has a lot of that signature groove, which I really, really loved. I think Dead Asleep, for example, could kind of go toe-to-toe with As I Am. But then A Broken Man has that sort of dissonant kind of feel, especially where guitars are concerned, but still maintains that groove and opens it up a little bit more. And that section where it kind of goes from the solo and the drums and they kind of like syncopate completely, I thought was so, so cool. It's like still one of my highlights of this record. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of The Great Debate as well. In parts, that track, I really, really loved it. But I think, you know, Are We Dreaming, as I mentioned, kind of, you know, brings you back into that world of the sort of like whispering and all that sort of stuff. But then it's followed by Bend the Clock, which initially I was kind of like, oh, this is like typical Dream Theater, cheesy sort of solo, like ballady song. But it actually kind of won me over a lot, and especially because it's got probably one of my favorite solos from Petrucci on this record, which is something to say about this album. I think, you know, both Jordan Rudess and Petrucci, I think, have the most sort of soulful, less kind of like, you know, firing on all cylinders. There's still some of that, but like I feel like there's a lot more feel to this record than there are, you know, some of the other ones that they've done. And, you know, Bend the Clock is a nice palate cleanser before we go into the 19-minute epic, which is the Shadow Man incident, which is kind of the only track that I'm a bit like, sometimes I really love it, and sometimes I'm just a bit like, meh. There's a moment sort of midway through which is sort of built around this snare roll and like military drums. Like sometimes I feel like it gets in the way, but then other times I kind of like it. It's a real tricky one for me, because then you have these like really open Rush style chords which come in, and then there's that sort of fever dream kind of like which is like, you know, signature Dream Theater. And then, you know, the floodgates open and it's all, you know, the usual bombast like 19-minute songs have. But it's a weird one. It depends on my mood, I think, sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I can do without that. But then other times I'm like, fuck yeah. So it's a really tricky one. But I think for me, the standout track is Midnight Messiah. And I'm so glad that this is a single, because I can kind of, you know, play some of it to you guys and you know, kind of mention some of this, because it's got that signature 80s feel, but most importantly, it's the first track, which was, you know, had the lyrics written by Mike Portnoy. There are so many Easter eggs in this song, which, you know, relate back to Constant Motion, This Dying Soul, the stuff from Metropolis, like It's Calling Me Back to My Home. Midnight Messiah! I also want to say one thing I did do, which I thought, you know, why not? It's all about dreams and everything. I listened to this record at about 3 o'clock in the morning, complete darkness, and it's quite creepy, actually. It's quite a weird kind of, like, it heightens your senses a little bit more in those moments of, like, you know, hearing the droplets and, like, the alarms and the little whispers and things like that. it really goes to show how much detail they've put into all of that. It's quite a creepy album, which I really, really liked, because I feel like Dream Theater haven't really done creepy. As an overall concept record, Parasomnia is pretty hard to beat. Musically, I think it's the most cohesive Dream Theater concept album we've had in a very long time, truth be told. Each track, I think, stands tall on its own, but in the overall kind of world of the album works really, really nicely. And the problems I do have with the record are kind of temporary and sort of depend on my mood, I think, sometimes. So I don't really want to kind of like mark it down too much because of that. And it's an album that has a lot of surprises. I thought Bend the Clock was going to be a predictable, cheesy ballad, but then boom, they bust out one of the best solos on the album. The Shadow Man incident, for all of its snare kind of jankiness, I guess, really comes in with some amazing riffs on that song. So it's hard to kind of, like whinge about it too much. But for that reason, I think I'm going to rate this a 9 out of 10, to be totally honest, because I've listened to this record so many times. I remember when I first got it sent, I was like, I don't know, listened to it maybe like 8 times in a row, and it still gets better and better and better. And I think it has the edge above all of the other records recently is that it's more memorable. There are more memorable sections in it. The overall concept is cool. It's just, everything ties it together really, really nicely, and it's very slick. So yeah, that's my first review of the year. Let me know what you think in the comments underneath me. I always love chatting to you guys, and really appreciate all of the support and feedback you guys always give me. So thanks ever so much for watching. If you did enjoy this, it'd be great if you could hit that like and subscribe button. It means the world, and I'll see you guys very, very soon for more album reviews. Take care, my friends.